going and enjoy our last couple of sessions together virtually. This has been a really long, big stretch without many breaks in between it. It's hard to believe we've been getting together since what, March? February? February. Wow. That has been a long time. It's been awesome. We have today and tomorrow. My goodness. I think I do need to wake up. Today and next Friday, as far as our virtual time together, there's still going to be other supports and opportunities for you all to keep getting together and supporting each other as you begin your cohorts and all your work with this learning and ideas that you've been generating over the last few months with your cohorts next year. And so we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. This week, we're going to be spending a lot of time in session 8 in IC3. And with that, it's looking at the pitfall list and using the curriculum alignment rubric to take one last look through a ladder before going to the classroom and teaching it. And so one of the things that we'll talk a little bit more about later today is that this is that deep part of the spiral and the focus on the ladder, right? There's been about 3 or 4 sessions where we've really gone deeply in the ladder and analyzing how you have a standards-driven instructional sequence, then going through and analyzing and building your own after you know what one looks like, having different checks to think about how you consider each of the points within a mini task, and now going back through with that curriculum alignment rubric, which for some of you who still might be thinking of it as a peer review rubric, right? It's the same thing. And looking at those indicators of quality and where does it sit in relationship to that. And so I really want to start this morning by taking a look at the new curriculum alignment rubric. One thing I want to call out as I'm sharing this with you is that all of your work as a part of this project, even as you continue with submission, your next round of submissions on June 30th or the extended submission date in July, everything's being scored according to the rubric that we were all familiar with when we started with this cohort, right? Not to switch things on people mid-game. But what we're going to look at is the brand new rubric, and this is the rubric that you'll be using with your teachers when you're looking at their instructional ladders, their task, their skills list, and giving them feedback over the course of this next year. And I think you're going to really like the changes. So I want to take a little bit of time and take a look at that together. So that way you have a feel for what it's going to look like. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And while I do, I'm going to ask, Barbara's going to go ahead and put in the chat. There we go. Now I got it on the right one. Barbara's going to put the link to the curriculum alignment rubric in the chat, so you can go ahead and go to it as well. But one of the things I want to call out is the very first change in layout. There's a couple of key changes in layout, and then the rest is about refining and in some cases adding more depth to the indicators within the rubric. So I'm going to walk you all through the changes, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. But before I walk you through it, what do you notice here as the very first page?
Incorporated the pitfalls.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that? Like, that's the very first thing you see now before you even get into the indicators, is starting with this opportunity to check for pitfalls and think about the pitfalls. I know it's been like, I don't know. We were in what, deep dive 1? It might have been blended. You know, it's hard when they all kind of run together. But when you guys talked a lot about how you use the pitfall checklist in different ways with teachers and how you might use it moving forward, and so positioning it here in the front might be a really helpful tool, right? Have that on the forefront of conversations as you start talking about quality with teachers that you're working with. So I'm going to scroll down and we'll keep looking through it. It's now posted in the chat, so if you want to pull it up on your own screen, or you can walk through with it on mine. So it has a pitfall checklist to begin with. And then the next thing is that the order of the dimensions has changed. Now, the very first dimension is content and literacy skills. Because really, as we're going through alignment, the very first thing we're checking for is there alignment to the standards, right? Is the content and the literacy skills that the teacher's been identified appropriate and driving the task in the right way? Clarity and coherence is important, but it seemed like there was a prioritization that needed to occur, and so those were flipped since that's the first thing that you're seeing. So if you notice, clarity and coherence is now the second dimension going down the rubric. And so the other thing is, here, there's this coding now. And so you can see where some of these work in progress indicators are now coded to the pitfalls they represent. So that PF stands for pitfall. So if the task does not identify focus standards, that relates to pitfall 1, which is interesting because that's a new pitfall for us, right? This task not standards driven. And so really making sure that that point is on the forefront of every single conversation about quality, coming back to the standards, which when you think about it, when we task workshops, that's right where we started, right? In our conversations and your conversations with your feedback partners, when you were looking at tasks, again, that was the first place you started. How does this align with the standards? Is it driven by standards? And making sure those are on the forefront of our conversations. And even with our task, our ladder workshopping conversations, I know all the ones that I've had, that's been a big starting point for us, right? Is looking at the task, thinking about the focus standards, and how is that reflected in our ladder and driving the thinking and work within our ladder. And so you'll see that taking center stage across the curriculum alignment rubric. In some cases, you can see where there's ands that make it good to go. Sometimes it's an or, it might be one or another. And so it's helpful to think about the indicators, because I know at different points in peer review trainings, people sometimes got hung up on when is it the right preponderance of evidence to decide which category it is. And so all of these things should kind of help as you're using this rubric with others. And so you still have your text, and again, you can see where it's coded to pitfalls. And also, we've made it so that the categories you can see are moving across. So something like text leading students towards a particular response or limit the range of student responses. There is a parallel indicator between work in progress and good to go. However, there's really not an indicator in exemplary. So it helps you really think about how this build from good to, well, okay, that didn't highlight the way I wanted to. But this build from good to go into exemplary, you can really see how it's a build now. And there is a few more indicators that go clear across where it's this and this as you're moving through. And then when you get into the ladder, that's the other place where you'll see some big changes. Again, it starts with the instructional ladder pitfall checklist, which we'll be looking at and thinking about today. The basic basics is linked right in here, which we spent a lot of time with last week. And so even on this rubric, you can come to it pretty quickly and find that document. The skills list, again, has the codes to the pitfalls within the instructional ladder. But I want you to take a second and look at the difference now with the mini tasks, the instruction part. Now it's no longer called instructions, it's really focusing on mini tasks. And as you can see, under each category, now it's really divided up as far as products, prompts, scoring guides, instruction, full sequence of mini tasks, and pacing. And so it's all those different pieces in the mini task template that work together to build the formative assessment, and you actually start thinking about those more specifically, as opposed to the old rubric in which it was just kind of that generic one box and it didn't have as much depth and detail. So that's kind of an overview of the new curriculum alignment rubric. And so I just want to put it out to the group. If you haven't opened it up yet, maybe go ahead and open up the document now. The link is again in the chat for folks. And what I'd like to do is just kind of have your thoughts and reactions in the chat. If you want to just talk about them verbally, please just unmute and join in. Oh, Kate, yeah. Really good point about making the calibration so much easier. Do you want to explain why? And then people can be entering in your thoughts or reactions to it. What do you like? What seems to make more sense to you? Or maybe, oh, well, I'm not sure about this part, right? Like it could be challenges as well.
Well, even though I'm an English person through and through, I'm a linear sequential type A math and science brained person, which sometimes the two don't get along well in my head. And Jackie, sorry, I saw that. And so I really appreciated when I was doing the calibration, things like for instance, our on-demand writing here in Kentucky makes me crazy because they just, the kids, the teachers work on this and they come back and they say, you're an apprentice with I got nothing. I have no idea what I did right. I have no idea what I did wrong. And so as a teacher, you find yourself reinventing the wheel every single time. And you could be reinventing the very part that was good and you have no idea. And that makes my head hurt. And so I felt that way about the old rubric where, it was all in one box. And if it was, good or bad or whatever, it was really hard to tell if you were calibrating and you got it wrong. Well, but why? Like what piece of this was I off the mark on? And what piece of this are they seeing that is good that I'm seeing that's not? And with these, it makes my linear sequential brain really happy to have like product, because if you tell me what to look for, I can look for it. So the fact that it says like product, prompt, it's just very step by step. And now I'm looking at these, and now I'm looking at these, and now I'm looking at these. And so it just was way easier. And I honestly found that when I was calibrating, when I calibrated forever ago after I had my first peer training, I was not getting them right as often, but this time I got the latter part right way more often than not. And I think it's because of that. It's not because I think I'm any better. It's because it was just so step by step that it just seemed more logical in my mind and more obvious. Like, oh, well, because of these 4 things, it's not, or because of these 4 things, it is. And it didn't used to be that way.
Definitely. Oh, thank you. I know sometimes I felt like when it was so big and chunked, it became more subjective too, right?
Right.
Really hard to know what direction to go, but then it was like, wow, it just felt so much more subjective. And now it's really bringing us back to that key thinking within each piece and why each of those pieces are important, right? Which I think we were missing for a while in our conversations. I know at least in my district, in my state, we didn't get into the deep conversations about mini tasks in the way that we're doing now before. Other folks, anybody else want to share one of your just kind of reactions, responses to this? See lots of nodding. Making sure to give sufficient wait time. All right. Well, one of the things that you'll notice is that the new curriculum alignment rubric is now already embedded in the system. So even though your feedback that you're getting is still with the old rubric, in some ways I think it would be nice, but we didn't want to trip anybody up by changing the scoring mid game through this process. However, in your courses and in module design, when you pull up your own review, what you'll see is this new rubric. And so you can kind of play around with it and get to know the indicators now as you move forward. Renee, I see your question there, and I'm just curious. It says it brings up questions for you about skills and other content areas. Just curious, love to dig into that a hair more if you want to speak to your question.
Yeah, so I work a lot with well, I guess everybody probably does other content areas, but most specifically lately, I've been working with science teachers. And we have so many conversations about the way that they approach NGSS. It's not just about those performance expectations and the content standards of science, but also thinking about the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. And to me, there are also skills embedded there. So the thing that it's bringing up to me when I'm looking at the instructional, there was a line in here where it's a work in progress if it includes skills that are beyond the LDC skills. So I would love to hear some input on how we can take into consideration other skills, or if that's just part of a bigger unit, it's not something they do in LDC. I might just be confused.
I'm going to share my screen again really quick because I want to make sure that we're looking at the same line. Because I know which one I went to, but I'm not sure if that's the one you're looking at. Are you looking at this one here? I don't know if you can see my screen yet.
No, I was looking at the one further down where it used to be instructional ladder, but now it's mini tasks. I think it was there.
Oh, okay. So down in there. Sorry. Thank you for that.
Yep.
It probably would have been better to have you share your screen, but.
Skills list. Skills list includes skills not relevant to the LDC task.
Yeah, so if you're including skills that aren't going to support your thinking in the task, but it sounds like to me what you described is part of building your focus cluster. And so then it would be relevant to the task, as opposed to if I'm having students do a deep analysis of a process, and then I decide to have them go suddenly interview people about something different, then that would be irrelevant to the task. I know it's a really bad example off the top of my head, but
okay.
But it sounds like with what you're describing, it would be inherently tied to the task, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at. If it's not explicitly stated, how are we making sure that they're still making sense of things by the processes that they use? So I might just need to spend more time looking at this. That might be the issue.
One of the things, yeah, Kelly is right. Yeah, I think Kelly's right. But one of the things that, or the ways that I have helped teachers kind of get around that is by adding something to the task, like including the word, like after reading an article and building a model. Like it's like if you sneak that in, then all of a sudden all those skills become fair game, because as science teachers, you know what goes into that piece of it. And so then that all becomes legit. So that's kind of how I'm not sure it's backdooring it, but in my mind it's a backdoor.
Yeah, well, and
okay.
I always think about those kind of things too, and you can add them as an additional demand, kind of in that sense as well, and through the extension, and now they all become tied to the task in different ways. Now the extension is a little bit sneakier because sometimes when things aren't related to the task, you move it there as like a secondary piece, but extension items can definitely still be included in the skills list. Sorry. And so those are some different ways, but I think Kate's suggestion is really nice about how you work that in, because part of I'm going to use your designing a model example, is part of the thinking that builds to your ability to answer the task successfully, right? And get to that thinking.
Yeah, I guess where I would, I see what you all are saying. I keep thinking about the overemphasis on the performance expectations standards in science, and not a lot of what's happening is I'm seeing teachers focus so much on that they're forgetting about the science engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts, which misses the three-dimensional thinking required for the spirit of NGSS. So I'm just trying to make sure that as I share LDC as a tool for them for gathering evidence about student learning, that it doesn't narrow it back down to just the science content standards, but it still gets at the SCP and cross-cutting concepts.
Renee, when I've done, so one of the things that we have found is that each content area has their own particular favorite pitfall, I guess. Like it's the flavor in which you're going to screw it up. And so if you call it out in advance and kind of laugh about it and say, so ELA people, here's how you're probably going to screw this up. And for ELA, for instance, the way that we really love to do it wrong is we love to make it about a topic, about cell phone.
Right. Yep.
Instead of about the standards. And for me, what you are talking about is the science version of that. And so if you call it out in advance and say, like, now science, this is the way you're probably going to screw this up. Your instinct is to go right to these and forget about this whole other dimension. That is a pitfall because it's not getting to the true intent of the three-dimensionality of the standards. So I think you're exactly right that is a very real possibility and a pitfall, but if you call it out in advance and call it a pitfall, then it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but then when it happens, you can kind of laugh about it and say like, oh yeah, look, you did it, let's fix that.
I agree, Kate, but I also agree with Renee in the sense that because the task names a PE as a standard, which PEs are not standards.
Right, you're right.
And when you have all those conversations about coherence, then you're trying to map skills back to an assessment, the PE statement, not how you might instruct it. So, like, that's one of the biggest misconceptions about the science standards is that you teach to the PE, which is not true. Like, your instruction shouldn't be.
I think I just ignore that part.
Yeah.
Listen, Kim, I think I ignore that part about when they're trying to steer you into that. Honestly.
Yeah, but I think that's something that LDC could do, like an actionable thing, if we could take the PEs out of the standards naming and instead ask science people to name a DCI, a practice, and a cross-cutting concept.
That would be great.
That would be huge, yeah. It would make, as coaches, it would make our lives so much easier because then you're not having to, the teachers are having to unlearn what they think they did the task correctly. And they did the task correctly, it just doesn't truly align with their standards. And so it's quote unquote okay as long as there's a coach to come back and like clean that up and point them in the right direction. But if we could just eliminate that step, it'd be way easier.
Kelly, I'll add to what you said. As a science teacher, I totally love what you just said. It's not about the performance expectations so much, or at least if you use a module in a science class. And it shouldn't really be about a DCI so much, but rather a cross-cutting concept, but probably even more likely an SCP. And I think we really need the ability to select the SCP or the CC when we select our standards. And I wouldn't even worry if we couldn't select a performance expectation. I'd rather that you couldn't. And I'd rather that you couldn't select a DCI because a DCI is probably not appropriate for a module. But
okay, so can I just, I
don't
want to derail it and take all our time because we maybe don't have to continue on this, but I feel like Kelly and Mike, you have more clearly articulated what I was trying to say. And so, yes, that's all.
Well, and I just want to kind of wrap this up and move forward in some of our thinking for today. First off, I'm really glad that we dug into this a little bit because I think it provides, like Kate was saying, I believe it was Kate who called it the actionable feedback, or maybe it was Kelly, but this is an opportunity to really think about what does it look like when you're selecting standards, right? And think about that a little bit more deeply. Also, I'm going to dig into, not at the moment because I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but looking at, because I know they've updated and changed a lot of the different standards that you have access to, and it's thinking about how you select it under the additional standards and you go to the state level. And with the NGSS being in there, I'm just curious if there's another route to get to some of the things that are there and we just haven't uncovered it yet. And so I'm going to look into that after this call, and if not, I'm going to start taking this feedback internally. and just seeing where we go from it. And that's why I think having these opportunities to dig into questions that arise for people and things that patterns you're noticing that would be really helpful, especially in the discipline, are super important conversations to have. And so I want to really thank you for all just of your experience and your expertise that you brought to your comments. And I think it's really powerful. And with that, I'm going to transition. And so I'm sorry to end it kind of abruptly. And thanks for kind of closing it up a little bit, Renee, and for posing that question. I think that was really important. What I want to do is go ahead and take us into session 8. That's where most of our focus is going to be, is looking at session 8, and we're going to move into session 9 and kind of see how the instructional cycle ends across each of these ICs. And so if you have not already opened your Learn tab, go ahead and open your Learn tab. And we're going to be going to IC3 session 8. And so that's where we're looking at pitfall analysis using the curriculum alignment rubric and the curriculum alignment self-review. Now, so our focus this week is on session 8, analyzing our instructional ladders using the pitfall checklist and the curriculum alignment self-review. This will coincide nicely with the great thinking that you all are doing in response to your reviews and the ladder workshopping you've been doing with Nicole or I. As a reminder, if you haven't signed up yet for a ladder workshopping session, which it looks like almost everybody has, please do so. Hopefully you're finding them helpful. There are dates that we've added to that sign-up sheet that go all the way into July. So the heart of this session in particular is really about checking for alignment. And when you select the action item, and I have pictures and stuff in my way, so sorry. When you select this action item to check your module for alignment, the sidebar opens and guides you through creating a review. I wanted to point out that this is the new rubric, but when it's opened as a review, the first page isn't the pitfall checklist. And so you might still want to have that handy or advise teachers, if you're going through this, to be thinking about how they want to use that. And so it'll guide you to go into more options, create a review. I'm just going to show the rubric. And so what you can see is that now, when you're looking across and thinking about the rubric elements, it starts with the content and literacy skills, and it's the new structure, as well as in the instructional ladder. When you go to mini tasks, you can see all those different points to help support you. So when I go back to the course, the next item in this section is writing your overview and your student background. And so I just wanted to ask the group, and so this is going to be an open conversation, and so please unmute and chime in. But at this point, we're at session 8. Everybody's already been writing their task. They've built their skills list. They've had deep analysis of their instructional sequence, and they're just getting ready to teach it. Right at the end of session 8 is about going forth and teaching your module and taking it into your classroom. So why do you think the overview and the student background appears here in the sequence and not earlier? Have any of you changed, updated, or added to either of these sections if you've been building and revising your ladder?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more you dig into it, the more you realize, well, you change, or it becomes just clearer as you go. You sort of have to start, and then once you get into it, the clarity comes, for me.
Yeah, definitely, right?
Another thing that it does.
Go ahead.
Another thing that it does too is it like focuses you on what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. And that's so important. I've been working with some elementary teachers who implemented a new curriculum last year. Wit and Wisdom is the curriculum that they implemented. And so this summer we have been looking at really deep diving into their modules to look closely at what's the intentionality of the lesson or set of lessons. And that is what this piece does for me. It gives me the intentionality and making sure that I can keep the forefront of what it is that I'm trying to accomplish.
Definitely. I like what Dana put in the chat too about how it's necessary to go back to that initial purpose, double check all your work, and make sure that you didn't stray somewhere along the way, right? Where you thought about it this way, and now as you keep going, it looks a little different. And I think to Jeanette's point, it's really powerful to have that kind of reflection right before you go into the classroom to teach it, right? So again, your purpose is clear, and you'll be able to guide students there as well. So there's a couple of layers. Other thoughts about why? And your own process, as far as have you gone back to it and updated it or changed it now that you're really digging into your ladder and thinking through that? Wait time in virtual realms is always so interesting, making sure to give time to unmute if people want to. I know Amy and I made some changes, huh? We added some things, you added some things to your overview as we were working on it too. I see her nodding.
I can add something to that, Kimba.
Yeah.
The time I changed my background and overview was after I received feedback, because assumptions that I made as the teacher teaching the module probably weren't fair to assume others would make as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to write this not for, well, I need to know who I'm writing it for, who's my audience. If I'm writing it for me so I could teach this again successfully next year, my background and overview will be written in a certain way. Or if I'm writing it for teammates that I collaborate with regularly, but if I'm writing it for a wider audience who doesn't know me, then they don't live in my head, and I need to be more specific in my background and overview.
Definitely. You know, one thing that reminds me of, Mike, too, is as you're working with your pilot groups this next year, and just all the teachers you work with in general, a really great opportunity to probe them or invite them to add things to their overview is when you're unclear, right? Like if it's something that you had to ask about and you're working with this person and know them, it's good to call out those things. Oh, you know what? You should put that in your overview. That wasn't clear to me as your colleague collaborating with you on this work, and help them see when to think of that. Excellent. So I want to pause for just a second and kind of pull us back a little bit to think about these instructional cycles as a whole, because each of these ICs, and I'm going to go back to our table of contents in this again so we can see that whole structure, is this lesson study cycle, right? In session 1, when you're thinking about when to teach your next module, you're looking at your curriculum and where to place it in your curriculum and how does it fit into, where do you have a gap or where do you want this kind of thinking. But then you're also looking at your student work from the previous session and thinking about, what do my students still need? What do I need to go back and reteach in my classroom versus what do I want to go deeper with in another module to get another dip, some more data and information about how they're progressing. And again, you're building that whole module with those kinds of things in mind, trying to align to your standards. When you get to this pitfall analysis, it's your last check, your last dip before taking it into your classroom and then getting data and information about how your students are doing. Did your task accomplish what you wanted it to? And what are your next moves going to be as a result? And that's what we really get into in session 9. Analyzing student work and using a protocol to analyze student work. And then session 10, reflect, revise, and decide on next assignments. And that can be next assignment for the next day in your classroom, the next month, or your next module, even those larger curriculum goals. And one of the things that you're going to find is this sequence of session 8, 9, and 10 is the same in every IC. It is a key fundamental characteristic of each of these instructional cycles. So here again, you have pitfall analysis, score and analyze student work, looking ahead, revising and planning, right, for the future. Same with IC1. Again, it's that same structure over and over of what are my goals? What am I going to do to get there? How do I improve the quality of my assignments and the quality of the standards alignment each time for students? And what are my next moves? And so I want to take a little bit of time to go ahead, and we're going to move into session 9 and look at the different protocols, because this thinking repeats in IC1, IC2, and IC3, there are 3 protocol options that you have, and they're repeated each time. And so when you're working with a group, you can use the same protocol each time. You can use a different protocol each time. You can decide that there's 2 protocols that you want to go back and forth between, and maybe you don't want to do the third one ever because it just doesn't quite work for you in the way you all want to look at student work at this particular point in time. And so we're going to take a little bit of time to dig into each of these. And so there is a feature in Zoom that we're going to try out today, and it's breakout groups. And so you guys remember using like Adobe Connect, and it would put you into breakout groups. You'd be in your breakout group and you'd have this really nice conversation because you'd all be able to talk and think about things. And in this, you can even share your screens and work through it. And then afterwards, you'd be pulled back into the main room to continue your conversation. Well, Zoom does that same kind of feature. And so we're going to use that today. And I'm going to divide you into 3 groups. Each room will take a look at a different protocol option. And so the one thing I'm unclear about, and just because this is the first time I get to do it with a large group, so thank you so much for being awesome. I feel like I'm setting that up for success and giving this a shot with me. So if you are either room A or room 1, somehow I'm sure it'll tell you what room you're in, and if it doesn't, well, just pick one that you like. But what I'd like to do is have room 1 or room A be protocol option 1, and what you'll do is you'll pull this up, you'll take a look, read through the protocol, and talk about it as a group, and think about what are the protocol's strengths? Are there any gaps in what you're learning about student work? And so we're going to do basically a jigsaw where each group is looking at a different protocol, thinking about what are the strengths and maybe any potential gaps with using this protocol to analyze your student work after teaching a module. And then you're going to come back to the group and share your results. Okay? So if you're in group room 1 or room A, you're going to be looking at protocol option 1. If you're in room 2 or B, you're going to be looking at protocol option 2. And if you're in room 3 or C, you're going to be looking at protocol option 3. So, and for this one, protocol option 4, I think that's the one that we're the most familiar with. So I'm not going to look at that one right now. That's using the LDC rubric to score and using that student work rubric. And so I want to take a minute and look at what some of the other possible protocol options are. Does that sound good? All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, which will make it a lot easier for me to put you into the breakout groups. Before we go, I want to ask if there's any questions. But before I ask that, I just realized there was one piece I didn't tell you. It'll say on your screen, you're now going to be moved into a room. You'll get this interesting little swirly thing as you get put in the room, and then you'll be in the room with everybody. And when it's time to be called back, you'll get a little message that says the room's going to end in a minute. If you do nothing, you'll just be pulled back into the room, or you can come back into the main room right away. I'm going to send you a message once you're in the room, and on it, it'll just restate these guiding questions for you when you're looking at the protocol. And so you can't chat back to that, so it is just kind of like a broadcast message as opposed to a conversation we can have back and forth. If for some reason you feel like you're running into trouble, just leave the room and come back to the main room, and I'll try to help you problem solve. Any questions before we give it a shot? Yay, I'm so excited. Sorry. guys actually get to talk with more than just one person. Yay! All right, so automatically there'll be 6 of you in each room taking a look at a protocol, and I'm going to create the breakout rooms. And they should be numbered breakout room 1, 2, and 3. All right, you guys, good luck. Ah, you made it back. It's so exciting. I can't wait to hear how it went. So how was the breakout room feature, you guys, now that you're making your way back in? Did it work without a hitch?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I've been dying to use that. Dying to use that. This is so exciting.
It's like you just had a new toy and you got to try it out for the first time.
Uh-huh. I feel like Christmas morning, right? Woohoo! Well, and then I saw that I have the option even to join in the rooms, like as the host, and so I could kind of pop into one room and then pop into another. I didn't want to scare anybody, so I was like, I'll save that for another time. Oh, welcome back, everyone. We were just joking about how excited I am about this. How did it work? Was that great? Did it work well? I see some nods. Oh, and I see a cute little head on Allie's lap. Oh, there's a baby. Oh my goodness. Oh, so beautiful. Yay. All right. So what were some of your thoughts from looking at those protocols? What were the strengths? Were there any gaps? What did you notice about using that to think about student work and analyze student work?
Recently, Wayne Stevens and I know Wayne's in here today, did a similar tuning protocol with some student work, and it was very, very powerful.
Nice.
And what it revealed about the instruction or lack of instruction, it was amazing, and I think it was very, very good for the teachers that were involved when we did that analysis. The reflection, I could just see the wheels turning inside their heads when they're thinking about, oh my gosh, how does this impact me? And they're thinking about future, like, oh my gosh, have I really looked at my student work with that lens of, oh, did they get it right or wrong, or did I get it right or
Oh, nice.
Which protocol did you guys talk about in your group, Liz?
Wayne had it, so Wayne can speak to it. It was very similar, though. We looked at
Was it
some
like
samples,
okay?
and we just went through a process of, like, if we were going to score it based on the identified rubric that was supposedly used to score, which was also very revealing, because I think at the end, the way that the student work was scored, there is no way, if that teacher used that rubric, that they would have scored that work the way they did.
Gotcha.
So it was really cool. It was awesome.
Excellent. How about some other groups? What are your takeaways after looking at this?
So we looked at protocol 1, which is the initial focus standards data analysis. And for that one, you're still looking at student work, but there's a series of questions that you think about, and there are like 10 it's several questions,
Right.
on there. And so what we talked about was that we thought that the questions covered everything that you would want to cover when you're thinking about, does the kids' work show the standards? But the questions are almost in 2 different chunks. So it might be nice to see them chunked in these are the ones that you need to look at as you're reading individual papers. And then these are the questions that you look at after you have read a class work of paper and papers. And those questions are the ones that you think about for the whole group. What does this group need? Because you start to asking about patterns between the papers and that sort of thing. So, because it is a little bit overwhelming to get in there and see all of those questions all at once, but if it was chunked into two parts of do these while you're reading individual, and then at the end, look at patterns across the pages, the papers.
Excellent. That's a really great point. Oh, go ahead.
Our protocol was protocol 2 about coding student work. And I think when you start thinking about that, it's like, oh yeah, that's so simple. But I envisioned myself, okay, I'm grading papers. This is what I'm doing. And what I noticed right off the bat is I was an English teacher. When I got your paper and you wrote something for me, I was all over your writing. This was really focusing on that reading standard or standards that I'd asked them to do. And I knew if I were grading papers right now, it would really force me to focus more clearly. And then hopefully that's going to transfer to kids, that they'll be able to code later on, etc., looking for evidence that they have shown in their paper about whatever that reading standard is. So anyway, I wish I had done that, but I will.
Well, and you know what I'd like to, I think that's so powerful, that transition from grading the writing to grading the giving feedback on the content and their understandings there. I also like how it kind of bookends. Remember doing the activity in the beginning where we coded student work and it wasn't our own, right? Or maybe we could start with our own. And do we see a difference in what they can do with content across the course of a year, right? If we're coding it multiple times. And so that's the other way to think about these protocols too, is when you're working with your cohorts, do you want to try using the same protocol to see how the impact you have now that you're looking for different things in student work over the course of a year? Back to Wayne's point, like it's hard to judge instruction until you look at student work. And do you see the change that you're hoping to change as a result over time? And so maybe it might be worthwhile with your cohorts as you go in next year, after each IC, after each module that they teach, using the same protocol to see if you're starting to see a change in the patterns in student work, right? In the same way that you can use a benchmark mini task, right? To see the growth in students. Do I see that change over time? And then being able to then apply that to us as teachers. So exciting.
I had just one more thing to say. Yeah. When we were able to go to Colorado and do the calibration scoring, the thing that we got off the most on was the content piece. And that's the most important thing that comes through their writing. Like, we were able to agree on the writing components, but the content piece and so I found that, like Jackie was talking about, how you get so wrapped up in the writing that you forget about the content. And I found that these kinds of protocols right here, like these, both 1 and 2, because I just kind of glanced through 2, they make you focus on the thinking work first and not the writing. And I think that that it's so easy to get, because kids struggle with writing. And I mean, we know that that's a super hard skill. It's so easy to get caught up in that stuff that you don't get to the actual content piece. And I feel like that because we work with so many content teachers, that they would appreciate the fact that you start with their content and not with how did the kid communicate it.
Oh, that's powerful stuff, right?
So Kim, building on that, I know that the rubrics you can customize the rubric, but the rubric starts with, the focus is on writing. So in that customization feature, can that content piece be at the top, or because what Jackie was talking about, that really made me think about that in a whole different way, because if we're using this format to teach the content, and of course we do that through the lens of reading and writing. So it just made me think.
I think that is a fantastic question, and I just wrote it down so I can ask, because I don't know. I know you can omit lines, but I honestly don't know if the functionality is there to move it on the rubric. And so I will get you an answer to that, Teresa, because I think that's a really powerful point. It's kind of like where we started today with looking at the new curriculum alignment rubric and how it's leading with content and focus standards. And so that's a really interesting thought about how to lead with it with our students with the rubric as well. Oh my gosh, it kills me when we get into these really rich, thoughtful parts of our conversation and we really dig into the work. It's like when you get in the classroom and you get to a really wonderful place in your discussion and your deep thinking and the bell's about to ring. I feel like our bell's about to ring. So I'm like, there's only 2 minutes left. Oh no. So now we're going to cram in all those like last few minutes of closure. How many of you used to do that in your classroom? I was guilty of it all the time, running right to the end and trying to squeeze it all in the last 2 minutes. I saw a number of hands going up. So that might feel like a little bit of a whirlwind, but I'll try to make sure that I'm clear and concise as much as possible. I'm going to share my screen because there's a couple of really important key things that I want to remind us of in our bigger picture today as we move forward. And that's that Kelly's been working with all of you to make sure that we get all the information about your licenses. And so part of what we need to know, and this is an older version, so I apologize if you have updated Kelly and it's not reflected on here. I just wanted to use this for purposes of remembering what we're looking at. The big thing that we need, participant names, those you can be getting to Kelly as you get closer. We realize it's still summer. But the big thing that we need is when you actually want to start your license. What start date do you want? Are you going to have a start date of August, of September, July? Where do you want your license to begin? And so the sooner we can get those, the better, and we can get everything moving forward on that. Kelly and Wayne, do either of you want to add anything to that?
I think we've had most everybody turn in their request for how many licenses they want. We do probably have about 4 or 5 people that haven't sent anything in, and so if you would get those to me, it would be very helpful. And I think what we need from almost everyone are the start dates, and so if we get those start dates in, then we can get those up and running.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Sorry that wasn't quite enough time to really get people saying their start dates now, but maybe what you could do is right after you finish this, I realize you have varying schedules, but maybe shoot a quick email to Kelly or Wayne or both and kind of just let them know when you'd like to start. Maybe you can even email your partner in your region as far as when you want to start and try to make those decisions right away. And that'll be really helpful because especially this time of year, we'll get off the call, you'll get pulled into a lot of different directions, be they personal or professional. And so just make sure that this stays tight on your radar, okay? I also want to go ahead, Kelly.
I'm sorry, I sent emails on Monday for people we need start dates from, so I sent individual emails, and so if you got one of those, if you would respond to that, and we will get your start date in.
Perfect, great, thanks so much, Kelly. Just a couple of reminders. There's still open ladder workshopping times if you need that. Our next submission is June 30th, and I sent an email with some information about what the date, what the title of the event is. One thing that we've added is this setting up your groups webinar. So once we have your license information, when you want to start it, we'll have a webinar to show you how to set up your groups, go through group management and get everything started. We are going to do that the first Friday after we finish this course, since you're still in the pattern and it won't feel such a big jump. I do realize it's the week of July 4th holiday. It's that 7th. It's a Friday. Well, we will record it, but there's that opportunity available as well for that webinar. Also, if you want to talk a little bit about calibration chats, calibration, we'll have our next one next week on Wednesday morning, and our next steps are just finishing going through session 8, right? Using that pitfall analysis and the curriculum alignment rubric to do your self-review before you submit for this next round. So I know we're 2 minutes over, so as to get you out of here, if you could just do really quick a final word whip in the chat so we can see what's resonating with you from today. I just want to say thank you. Today's conversation was really powerful, and I liked hearing each other and being able to build off of each other's ideas and learn how to do all of this work even better. So thank you, everyone. Barbara and I will stay on for a few minutes if you need either of us afterwards, but enjoy the beautiful temperature. Jackie was telling me you guys were in like the 70s and 80s. Enjoy it. Have a wonderful day, you guys.